Hey there, rugby fans. Welcome to another great episode here on the Rugby Rant podcast show. A reminder, my name is Ty Braga, your host for today's activities, alongside the familiar faces of Scott, the big guy Ferrara, wearing his suave, but of course, drinking his Giltini, sipping it down, and of course, we'll learn more why in a moment, right? But more importantly, let's swing it over to Rob. Give him a how's it. Rob, there he is. You see him. And more importantly, last but not least, joining us from the rugbyshop.com is representing them, Kyle Ferguson. Kyle, welcome to the show, my friend.
Thanks again, guys. 50th episode, pretty exciting stuff. So I'm glad to be here. And I had to rock the Rooney gear after they beat LA, and I talked trash to Mr. Ted Cake there. So
yes,
had to own it. So thanks for having me, guys.
Well, it is a pleasure, man. And you're right. It is also good to be able to see somebody beat the Giltinis, who they believed was unstoppable. But I believe what Scott Lawrence has said, to be able to beat them, you first need to beat the legend, right? And that's what's happened. And we're going to be diving into that during the course of this episode when we get to the latter part of this presentation, where we're going to be talking about that matchup between, of course, Rooney and Giltinis at Cochrane Stadium. But before then, I want to be able to hand the mic back to our guest of honor here, Kyle. Of course, you are there with the Rugby Shop guys, who is a key sponsor for Major League Rugby right now this season. You guys are almost popped up overnight, so to speak, but I know it's a lot of hard grinding on your side. So tell us a little bit about, in a nutshell, who is the rugbyshop.com?
Well, thanks for that intro. Rugbyshop.com, what are we? We are a bunch of rugby guys wanting to give back to rugby is basically what it is at the end of the day. Our co-founders do that. Started out of the back of a truck, basically. I think the main thing for us at the Rugby Shop, as opposed to Shop MLR, is we're looking at the clubs, right? We're looking to help every club out there that needs the help. There's always the one guy in the club that does everything, merch, ordering kit. Let's order 100 hoodies, and now I have to go through them. Well, guess what? There's a better way, and we are the better way. So we'll look after all that for you, pre-orders, all that kind of stuff. I know these guys mention us all the time and say, come to us for kit, but online shops, we fulfill. Anything custom you're looking for, we fulfill. Like, we do it for you so that you don't have to bother. We give you a kickback at the end of the day, and Bob's your uncle.
Right,
so
and you're setting up online stores for them, distribution.
You bet.
I mean, you're basically the one-stop shop, right?
One stop. We're doing the Chicago Riot. We're working with those guys over there in Chicago right now. Seattle Rugby Club on the other coast. So
Girls Rugby Inc. as well, of course, supporting rugby youth.
You bet.
So, and I was going to say, by the way, I saw the Chicago Riot store and I looked at all the merch, and I'm a Blaze guy through and through. I almost stopped and said, I got to have some of that, but my real,
because we all know
merch came out and I had to pause myself
with
like
swag.
Scott, I'm an absolute merch whore, so I'm pretty much I'll wear one of those and I'll wear one of those.
We know you're representing the Arrows right now, so we know.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Honestly, my wife, my stuff has now been, my rugby stuff has been banished out of the normal household, and it's now down into the basement where I have all my rugby stuff, and it's got its own space. But as to say, you can never really have enough rugby gear, right?
Yeah, my wife now buys me clothes that have no rugby on it and just brings it home and says, "You're wearing this." So, yeah.
Well, we digress, and talking about rugby is why we're here, gentlemen. So let me take an opportunity to remind those viewers at home who may not yet be familiar with us here on the Rugby Rant podcast. Well, we are a team of guys that talk about rugby, think we know what we're talking about, and we like to be able to debate those points. But more importantly, how does it work? Well, each of these guys has 2 minutes to be able to rant on the topic at hand, which has been chosen by you as the fans on our social media at the handle at Rugby Rant Pod, where you can follow us each week with a poll that is set up. This week, what came out on tops was the question, what defines the rugby style of MLR and how does it compare to leagues elsewhere in the globe? So if you gentlemen are given 2 minutes and go over your 2 minutes to rant, you will be awarded the yellow card, what we like to be able to call on the Rugby Rant, say it with me, the cheese.
The cheese.
Exactly. You can tell we rehearsed that one very well. So if you continue forward, it will be, and you continue to infringe, should I say, you may be escalated to the red, which means that you could miss a round in the debate.
Hold up your beverage, Kyle. The wine with the cheese, as we like to say.
Well, he's not a wine. Let's see if he's out of cheese.
Well, I was going to ask, have you ever given a guest a card?
No, you're going to go first.
Okay.
Robin fringes all the time.
He's not a guest, though.
Right. No, we've given him the card. We just haven't given one the red card, but I'm pushing for you to get it.
You ready? Okay.
We're all voting for
Glad you don't have it in your pocket.
So I have a yellow card.
Let's
I made it just for you, Kyle.
To the topic at hand as we move forward to be able to remind everybody and those on screen with us here that with their 2 minutes, they need to put as many points forward to help us understand what they believe defines Major League Rugby and its style of rugby right now and how it compares to elsewhere in the world. At the end of this round, we'll see who has put the best points forward, who best helps us define rugby in America and Canada. And we open the floor with our guest, Kyle Ferguson. Kyle, take the floor.
Since we didn't have much time to rehearse this, we're just going to wing it. So from what I would gather, obviously I would go with the Southern Hemisphere with the open style of play, the lots of points, the less boring style. Scott, sorry, but you know, that Northern Hemisphere stuff can get kind of dry at times. But I think with the signings as well and the amount of Southern Hemisphere, I would say older people, not elder statesmen, but older-ish that are in the league would they're older than me. That's it. Okay. Yeah, that's it. Probably younger actually, but still old anyways, as per professional standards, they're on the older side of that, let's say. But there's a lot more Southern Hemisphere guys, high profile, as opposed to the Northern Hemisphere from what I've seen. So I think just them coming has led to that style of play, as opposed to the Rob Shaws who, what did he last 20 minutes before he hurt his shoulder, right? Like there's not a lot of the Northern Hemisphere guys in the MLR at this point. So I think that leads right into the Southern Hemisphere style with all those guys that are here playing. Cecil Africa, Giteau, Cooper. There's a lot. So
right, yeah,
that's what I got.
Can go on.
Yeah, it's a big list. So that's why I would go with more Southern Hemisphere. Even the coachings, right? The coaches are much more Southern Hemisphere than Northern Hemisphere. So right. I think it all just leads to that open style of play. Now, whether that was planned or not, you'd have to ask the powers that be, but I think it does make for more entertaining play. I'm a guy that has grown up in the game and I love the game. So the Northern Hemisphere definitely has its place. You know, the breakdowns and everything there are much more technical, let's say, than the Southern Hemisphere where everybody just gets out and plays and let's go to the next one. But I think this one leads more to the Southern Hemisphere, in my opinion.
Help us understand, when you say the Southern Hemisphere, the three big nations that people think of is New Zealand, South Africa, and Australia. Would you say it's kind of a blend of these different styles, or is it more swing towards one nation than another?
I would say it's a blend for sure. And I would also throw Argentina with the amount of guys that are here playing in the league from there as well, right? But it goes to that tri-nations style of play all over. I think they all play a more open game than the Northern Hemisphere in general.
Right. And I would tend to agree with you. And, you know, another person who's a huge advocate of Southern Hemisphere rugby, of course, is Mr. Rob Hammerschmidt, who's a Hurricanes fan. Let's see what he thinks.
I agree with Kyle, and I think it's a much more reflective of a Southern Hemisphere style. I would say it's much more Australian, like Tasman based. And the reason I say that is I don't know that there's as much of an emphasis on the scrummaging piece. Of course, that's been taken away a little bit because of the code changes for this season. You know, we're starting to see more creativity in the line out. You notice it most significantly from LA, but I absolutely think it's a strong Tasman influence. You've got three, you know, Australian coaches that I know of specifically. Paul Healy in Houston. Nola, of course, has Nate Osborne, and in LA, of course, you have a whole coaching staff there. But you notice, I want to pick up on the one piece. LA plays a very flat style. They play a 1-3-3-1, very flat style. I mean, when that ball gets passed, it is very close to the gain line. Sometimes so much so that it looks like it's a forward pass, and that's very typical of the Australian and New Zealand style of play. So, you know, South Africa tends to have much more strong set pieces, scrummaging, you know, physical back row forwards. And I don't know that we had those kind of players as pervasively throughout the league as they do in South Africa.
Right. So to rewind a little bit, and for those that aren't so well versed in the rugby terminology that you use, when you're talking about a 1-3-3-1, you're essentially talking about the makeup of your attacking line. And so pods is what we refer to in rugby, and that 3 pod is most crucial. And what it is you have 3 players that are attacking that defensive line, but they're waiting to the fraction before that impact is made to be able to either make the pass or decide, am I taking contact, or will somebody else be able to take that ball on for me? So you're saying that with LA being kind of a leader in the league right now, not only in position in the league, of course, on the points table, but it's certainly in terms of that style of running rugby, take it right up to the gain line, make those last second decisions that are those beautiful little pop passes that allow that break on the inside. And if you look at their line break record, it does reflect this. Yeah. But of course, it didn't quite do that in the Rooney game, which we'll talk about later.
But like, just think about how many inside passes Van der Merwe has taken to break the gain line. Think about how many times that ball's come back inside from the forwards or come out from like a guy like Cottrell or with their captain, whose name escapes me in the second row, has done a really nice job of getting the ball onto the backs. Yeah, Dave Dennis, right. So, I think they just play that Tasman style much more. Much more.
And I would say those are all Southern Hemisphere guys that are all running those and used to running those same lines, right? And then you throw DTH in there, who's just a support machine, and away you go.
Right. Obviously, experience at all different levels of the game. So a great candidate at being able to finish those runs. So let's swing it over to Scott Ferrara to hear what he thinks.
Let's get hot, baby. So I think you have to take a look at it. I don't think there's a style in the MLR, to be quite honest. There's teams with similar styles, and then there's teams that aren't similar. I mean, I feel Rooney is the outlier. I think what Greg McWilliams was trying to build at Rooney was something that they do at Team USA, which Greg McWilliams is a part of, which is have those set pieces that the Northern Hemisphere has, excel at those set pieces, but on the backline play have that Southern Hemisphere feel. And you could tell by the makeup of the squad, you still have James Rochford up there anchoring that front line with Dylan Fawcett. And then now Zach Tuilafu has come in, and that engine in the scrum is working there. What you don't see with a team like Rooney, which is considered like a Northern Hemisphere style team up front, is the box kicking. What they've decided to do was they do have guys with bigger legs out in the back line. Their exit kicks are now coming from the back line and not necessarily box kicking, which Mike Petrie in 2019 was a box kicking machine. I mean, he excelled at it. So I think you have to go squad by squad. I don't really think it's a blanket statement that, it's Southern Hemisphere. I think people are trying to work it out. And I think it depends on the adjustments. So, we've seen Rooney play San Diego. We've seen Rooney play Old Glory, where they have this attacking line and they play this flowing rugby. They did it against NOLA. It didn't work. And then we saw them play against LA, and they had more, as Kyle said, of a Northern Hemisphere feel about running the ball with their forwards, again, kind of grinding it out in the scrum. And I feel like Rooney has been in their scrum, has been the best scrummaging team. But, for whatever reason, the officials don't, the officials, this is a gripe on me. The officials always give the penalty to whoever. No, the officials always give the penalty to whoever has the input of the ball, which is not necessarily what's going on. Because Rooney was doing it against LA, where everybody knows LA's scrum isn't the best. Rooney is now overpowering them, winning the scrum, but they give it to LA, the penalty, because the put-in was to LA. And you could tell your buddy Kyle, our friend Mike Lash, maybe he should study up on some of the dark arts here, because I just feel it's well, no, seriously, Rooney is powering these teams, and LA wasn't the only team they've done this to, and then they just give the penalty to the opposing team because they had to put it. Doesn't really make sense.
So two things here. Rob please. Is reminding me. My assistant referee in the top left-hand corner has indicated that there is
he put his flag out.
Yeah. Does it look like I care as I'm bashing the officiating in the MLR?
Listen, Scott was complaining off camera about the ARs not doing their job enough and helping out the officials. So I thought I'd just point the way.
So I had a look
a little
front foot.
Yeah. So here's the thing, though. Before you jump into it, Kyle, I wanted to be able to first of all just let everybody know that a yellow again, first infringement there for Scott Ferrara. But I love how you went into almost a second rant. Like you gained a whole new level of momentum there. So I best can define your rant as Mr. Referee, I would agree with you, but then we'd just both be wrong.
No, I mean,
So-
no, but as far as style of play, I do think it's team dependent. I don't think the MLR has a set style of play. There are
Right.
teams that do certain things better, and I think what you're seeing is when you see LA win these big matches, they have a lot of highlight plays. So that's what you're seeing on social media if you don't watch the other teams play.
Right. So to that point about teams having a differing style of play, that certainly is evident almost in every league, right? But you know, with a continent and game spread so far and wide as it is across the two nations here, with Canada and of course the US, and geographically them being so far apart, they've almost developed their own styles. And then of course the coaching that comes in also influences that. Then the players that come in influence that. So there's a lot of great influences. But I think we can largely agree that more of those influences on MLR are coming from Southern Hemisphere nations. Would that be fair?
Yeah, that would be fair. And like I said, I think it's Marty Veal is New Zealand by birth. He's been in the United States for a long time coaching. Rooney just got a new attack coach in Matt Bork, who's from New Zealand. But again, you have these guys doing what they feel is the right plan of attack, but you also see the adjustments when a team has to go do something. It's not just Rooney; it's the other teams to close
that
it down.
separates a good team from a great team, right?
Yeah.
And again, we're kind of alluding to this conversation, but it will be coming up later. And you spoke about Rooney. Rooney does have a versatile platform to be able to build from. They can, of course, play the running rugby. They do have a good kicker who takes really great control of the game at 10 with Holland's Head. They also have the heavies up front to be able to keep a solid pack running forward, right? So if they need to ground and pound, they probably could. If they need to be able to swing it out wide, you can feel confident that they could do so. But none of that happens without, first of all, securing the ball, making sure you got clean ball to the backs. And I think that's where overall MLR is a little bit failing. Now, Rooney might be a little bit ahead there, but overall in the league, I think that's an area that while we're too focused on getting the ball out wide as quickly as you can, it's not quality ball. What do you think there, Rob?
Well, I was going to say, like, I know where Scott's going with this one, and I certainly thought that, and we'll get to it later. Rooney really played a nice game. They played the game they needed to play and adjusted to their opponent. But I still think there is a more tendency to be akin to the Southern Hemisphere. And I think about Rugby ATL, who's headed by Scott Lawrence. Scott Lawrence is an American born and bred, but Scott's team can play a very expansive game. I mean, just look at the way they went after NOLA a couple of weeks ago, and they went out through the wide channels on two different times, chipped ahead, and scored two off that. And they play a fast game. They play a quick game. And they play very in-your-face defensive style. I mean, they are very quick to get to that gain line, like very many Southern Hemisphere teams. And then they don't contest very much, and they wait for you to make a mistake, much like LA does on defense. They just grind you down, wait for you to make a mistake and cough over the ball. And the last thing I just want to add to this is some of this dictated by the personnel. Like LA just did not play very well because their quarterback, Matt Gittu, wasn't in. Again, we'll talk about that. But, to more to that point, Robbie Coleman had the potential to really play a more expansive game. Guillemon's in there because Coleman's out with a knee injury, and their game has changed a little bit more. They're sticking with a good forward pack, good line out, strong scrum, kicking to the corner when they can, but kicking for points when they should. So, I think they're adjusting a little bit depending on the personnel because the depth across the league just isn't there.
Right.
And sorry, and another good example of that is what's happening in San Diego. You do have Carlo Denison there starting at the 9, and his backup is Patrick Madden, who is drafted, coming out of college, and then they just signed a third scrum half, from a U20 team. So now they have to then go into different tactics to have that 9-10 exchange a little different,
right? And this is something that I think has now evolved with the help of the law variations. And we had kind of alluded to this a few episodes back, and I couldn't even remember which one it is, even if you had tested me now. But more to the point is the 9s have a little bit more breathing room now with the new law variation of the input of the ball at the scrum, and of course how close you can contest that line. So with that, you're seeing more of this 9-10, like 9 carrying the ball a little bit more than I might traditionally have done so in the Southern Hemisphere or in the Northern Hemisphere, certainly more than they do in the Northern Hemisphere. I'd agree with that. So that has changed the game. Why has it changed the game? Well, it means that that guy who normally might just be able to accept the ball from the back of the scrum, for those of you that are still learning the game of rugby, he would normally be the first distributor. And he would decide, is it going left, is it going right, depending on the style of the play, where the position of the field is. Now he's able to take that ball in hand and run a little bit more with it, see what options there are, provide a little bit of an extra man on the outside. So it has certainly changed the game. That's almost something that's evolved that is uniquely MLR. Wouldn't you guys agree, Kyle? I mean, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think to your point, it is giving them some more room. Some guys like Andy Ellis still don't get it, in my opinion, and just keep creeping up that way, and they need to stop them. But anyways, we'll talk about that later, apparently. Yeah. I was a 9 at one point, but there's a few things I wanted to touch on there. I think back to Scott's point about the scrums, like penalizing, right? Like, so we were talking about penalizing. I think the problem here is not the problem, but like referees in general, let's be honest, not front rowers. To your point, don't know the dark arts. So now you're leaving in the hands to somebody that's never been up there, right? So I don't know what the instructions are from head office. I don't know what they're doing at all there, but I'm just saying, like, as a former referee at a high level in BC, I would be more inclined to give the attacking team the ball and just get the ball away. That's my opinion. Right? Again,
I have a whole thing. What we need to do is you have to have forwards that are referees, and you put them on segways, so that way they don't need to worry about fitness during a match.
Oh, so like rugby league, and we could just have one on either side. But anyways, back to the scrum halves.
That's your off.
Yeah, exactly.
That's my off.
They wear magenta anyway, so they're good. I mean, it's
because the one thing that forwards hate is cardio.
Yeah, that would be perfect, because then they could go have a smoke break and have a beer at halftime.
Right. You just like, as soon as it crosses that halfway line, you just chill.
Yeah, I'm good. The scrum halves are getting more room, especially like at the scrum for sure. Like without a doubt, that's a great attacking platform now. Like more so than in any other league.
And it's uniquely an MLR at the moment. I don't personally know of that same law being trialed elsewhere. Now, other leagues are continuing to trial leagues. So let's talk about other leagues and how they compare. One thing that I have in my mind, and I always come to this because I've watched Super Rugby from its inception, having grown up in South Africa after the Currie Cup, and we suddenly were allowed to be able to compete internationally. Super Rugby was the best, at one time was the best league possible. It's kind of been diluted over the years, but I still believe the same style of rugby is continuing to attempt it to be played. What is that style? Running rugby. Physical game up front, followed by great backline play. Arguably too much kicking, but more to the point, they did a study in 2019, pre-pandemic, right, with Super Rugby as a whole. So the three nations, Australia, I should say four, because it had an Argentinian side then. And they decided that there was an average of 37 minutes of rugby in open play. That means how much of the ball was in hand during play, 37 minutes out of 80 minutes. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot when you put it in that context, but in comparison, MLR is at 35 at the moment, is what they say. So it's very, very close. So these laws that were introduced at the beginning of the season were all designed to be able to make the game faster and ideally more entertaining. While it hasn't quite achieved the same number of the time in play, I believe it has made it more exciting. And one measurement of that is just by how many tries have been scored. And one of the big points of discussion that's been brewing, and I want to go once around the table to get thoughts on this one, is MLR all about attack? So let's open it up with Kyle.
Yes.
Okay, short and sweet. I like it.
Well, no, the laws have attained to that. To your point, the scrum half, like I know Mike Lash, I watched his episode and they do it in New Zealand. We do it too up here at the youth levels. So it's the same thing. Like the 9 doesn't pressure, so you just leave that alone. So I think like they want to attack. They want to have attacking rugby. That's why they've done that. I think that one will stick. It's kind of a no-brainer. But the rucks, kind of messy, not really helping their play. If those were a bit cleaned up, we could be seeing, in my opinion, a bit better flow, let's say. Like, because back to Scott's point before, like the rucks are a bit of a mess, right? Like all over the place. You watch it and it's like, oh, there's guys, where did he come from? Why is he there? Oh, how did he go over? And I feel like it's not as stringent as some of the other ones. Like you flop over, you're done. Whereas here, it's like you flop over, I'm going to give you a second, right? And it kind of
It's not
slows
as
it down
clean
a
and
lot for
clinical.
me. Yeah, right. But I think the biggest thing for me with MLR is we're trying to reach a fan base that isn't rugby. If we just stick to people that are rugby like all of ourselves, it's never going to grow. I think they have that audience.
That's true.
So how do you make it attainable for a fan that isn't a rugby person? Like I took my wife to Seattle last year and she was quite impressed. She's not a rugby person at all. But she was like, that was fun. Like the atmosphere was good. The game was good because the pace was good. Those are the people we need to get to like this league in order for it to sustain. Right. And I think what they're trying to do is leaning towards getting those fans. So
excellent. Yeah, I think that's a pretty fair assessment. Rob, what are your thoughts on that note?
Well, I think we have to keep in mind the defensive structures in the MLR aren't quite to what we would typically see in the Northern Hemisphere or even in the Southern Hemisphere, right? I mean, they have to come a little longer way. And it'll come with time. They'll get as teams gel to get together a little bit more, as perhaps more teams have players that are based in the United States and can spend a bit more time organizing their defensive structures. We'll see that improve. One of the things I would like to see is some statistics on transition tries. So how many tries are scored from transitional play? And that's one thing that's really typical, of course, of New Zealand is that, the time of possession would be low, in their international matches, but yet they would still win. And you'd go, how the hell can they win when they don't have as much time at the ball?
Right, that perception that you can never count New Zealand out, right? Because they can score at any moment.
That's right. It's because when they got you is when they got possession of the ball and they came back and counterattacked and just ran with it. And then, a guy like TJ or Nugget was always following up in support and then would be a distributor to somebody else flying by on the wing.
Well, and that's what LA did the first how many weeks, right? Yep. Like really, they didn't have the ball that much. Right. They'd turn it over and DTH was gone.
And exactly and it comes down to which team is also fitter, but also it's kind of that boxing philosophy is keep them on the ropes, right? The rope-a-dope technique. And New Zealand is definitely a great example of that. I mean, I remember in competition for probably close to about a decade, from 2010 through to probably 2018 almost, New Zealand was unstoppable because they had perfected this style. They would let teams just kind of keep battering at them, and defensively they would hold, right? Because that's the key. It doesn't work if you don't have great defense, right? Otherwise, you just got to put more points on the board, and that's your only strategy. And to that point, that does make exciting rugby. But for the true ardent fan, he wants to see just as much of a defensive battle as he does an attacking platform, right? But more to Kyle's point, if you're brand new, what do you want to see? You want to see what defines rugby, which is exciting running rugby, great hits, and awesome points, right? So, Scott, what are your thoughts there in that regard?
Well, I think the new law variation is obvious, like everybody said, is meant to be attacking. And I think I think the issue the MLR is seeing on defense, and this is something I've been thinking about since people have been talking about it. I mean, they've been talking about it online for weeks. And I think because it's a new league, think about how much head coaching turnover we had. Think about how much player turnover we had. So that means the squads from 2019 and 2018 not only have different coaching systems, have different player systems. How are those symbiotic? So what kind of analysis do you really get to try and figure out somebody's attack? So like when we had Scott Lawrence on, he said, one of the biggest things somebody should get when they're starting a team first, before even a head coach, is an analyst. Get a great analyst to analyze everything. So what kind of analysis are you getting out of teams who in 2018 played this style with this set of team, 2019 played this style, 2020 there wasn't a style, and then nobody played preseason games against each other. So all you have is the last 6 matches, and they might have had a bye week. So maybe it was only the last 5 matches, and maybe the wind was 60 miles an hour in San Diego. So what kind of game did you what kind of game data did you get from that? So I'm wondering,
Las Vegas, right?
I'm sorry. Yeah, the San Diego playing in Las Vegas.
Come on, Ted.
But so what kind of data points are you getting versus like if you want, I can always go back to college football. There's certain teams that are always going to run the pro I formation. There are certain teams that are going to run the RPO, run pass option. Right. So you can you have all that data to look at, and at the MLR you don't.
Scott, I'm going to interrupt you there only to give you a bonus point. Because
I was
think
gonna.
you probably
Yeah.
have summed up the conversation in an easy manner. Like, how can we define a league's style of rugby when it's constantly evolving and it has every year had a new set of challenges and a new set of rules and a new identity around it? So, I mean, is it just the case of it's too soon to tell?
I think you have to establish, have these teams established with coaching staffs for a little bit, and maybe have the not so much player turnover, and then you could say, oh, there's a pattern in Rooney's attack every single year.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's
And there
fair. And I
hasn't
think
been much
without,
consistency throughout the league.
yeah, and I was going to say, without having guys here full time, like really, like they came in how long before the season? How long did they have to put these systems in place? This isn't a league where you're making 7 figures a year, right?
Right.
So they don't have the time nor the manpower in order to be doing this yet.
And
But
On that
hopefully that
note,
comes.
let's take it once around the table again, just to be able to summarize this segment here, where we had asked the question for those of you that are watching at home. The question was, what style of rugby best defines Major League Rugby as it stands, and how does it compare to leagues elsewhere in the world? So at the beginning, we had opened up the rant with Kyle, and Kyle had suggested that it best suited a Southern Hemisphere platform style and running rugby. That was same thought was echoed, but then identified more closely to being a Tasman style linked to Australian Rugby Union. Scott said that, it has elements of both. So again, let's go once around the table, gentlemen. Is it now too soon to actually tell what is Major League Rugby style? And is it too soon to compare it to other leagues? Yes or no? Kyle, what do you say?
Yes.
All
MLR is
right.
playing MLR, I feel, and they're taking what they know from home because, just like we just talked about and I just mentioned, I don't feel like they've had enough time to practice together, to be together, to do all of that, to have these styles fully take over yet. So it was a good round there, gents, because you kind of changed my mind a little bit, but I think that's a good way to look at it.
All right.
Doesn't
I
happen
like
often.
Rob, your thoughts?
I think it's more of an expansive style. I think that the league wants it that way. They want to keep it more running. I mean, it's obvious in the law variations that they're trying to do that. And it's also obvious by some of the influences from, you don't see a lot of English coaches coming to the United States to coach in the MLR. You see it largely from the Southern Hemisphere, mostly from the Tasman. That being said, let's see what the future holds as more players are based in the United States, as more coaches are based and stay in the United States to organize teams prior to what? February.
Yeah.
I mean, as it is, there are quite a few coaches that are not staying in the United States in the offseason. They're going back, and therefore the teams can't organize as quickly and get as thorough of a preparation for the season.
Fair enough. Enjoy those comments. Scott, you have the final thought.
Oh boy.
And
before I
Don't
answer that,
choke on that, big guy.
I was going to try and get myself out of the yellow card by saying this bonus point. Earlier this week, the NFL schedule came out, and October 23rd, Allegiant Stadium, the Death Star, is open. The Raiders are not playing there. We haven't seen the college schedule yet, but the Raiders are not playing there. So, that All Blacks test match might be, or that AB 15 or whatever we're going to call it,
right,
might be
haven't
on.
Decided yet.
Yeah, but I was trying to dig myself out of that yellow card with that. But I think again, I think it's to be determined what style, what they're trending to is a more open, expansive Southern Hemisphere style. But I think you're still going to see teams, especially in the United States. American fans love the scrum; they love set pieces as well. And you do have to cater to those fans too. There's a lot of those fans who are so adamant that rugby league is not rugby because you have canceled those items in rugby. So if MLR really is looking at it, I understand they want the excitement, they want to draw people in, but they do have to cater to the other fans like me who love those set pieces.
Right, those same fans that have already proven to support rugby in the US by attending an All Blacks game, Irish games, and beyond. Right, those guys that are happy to be able to spend $100 a ticket to be able to go and see top quality rugby. And so it's a difficult balance to be able to strike between the two. But so far, MLR has been doing a well enough job. We just hope it doesn't go too far to one side or the other. So.
I just want to say, I think they can still have set pieces and have expansive games. I mean, look at what LA is, the creativity they're bringing to the table off the line out. and Nola had a couple of really nice line out moves in the same vein, not quite as executed quite as well, but nevertheless, I think you're going to see it. But
I absolutely agree
more
with
about
that.
the control game, controlling the pace of play, controlling the game with kicks and possession and territory gains rather than, transitional rugby.
And to your
I
point on the
absolutely agree.
scrums, I think there can be a mandate there to not have 10 resets, but you don't have to penalize or
Definitely.
whatever after the second, right?
Correct.
Like
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
some stuff
Correct,
there to
yeah.
play with, but
Yeah, there's leeway. There's
yeah.
leeway.
Yeah, like, they could be told after 2, let's try and make a decision. Sometimes there's not one, right? Like I was saying, like as a referee, if there wasn't one, what do? You give the ball to the attacking team, let's get away. So anyways, moving on.
Moving on is the final words that I'd like to be able to dwell on for a moment. So, once again, it has been an opportunity to be able to discuss at length with our panel of experts here, to be able to share our thoughts on what defines Major League Rugby, what style, and how does it compare to other leagues from across the globe. Now, as it stands, a very young league. I think we all agree that it's still evolving, but what has already evolved is a running rugby expansive style, best taken from the lessons served through Southern Hemisphere style of rugby, as its influence is seen with players and coaches and even management and onto ownership as well. So it sends a message that it is leaning that way. So, yet still a lot to be seen. And that's where we stand here on the Rugby Rant podcast show. Make sure that you like, follow, and rate us online under the handle at Rugby Rant Pod, where you can find us through social media and any of your podcast providers that you enjoy under the handle at Rugby Rant Pod. We will see you at the next segment, where we will be taking time to learn more about what we think as we dig into the battle between the Giltinis and Rooney from this past weekend. So make sure that you follow us on social media to get more of that content under the handle at Rugby Rant Pod. Once again, my name is Ty Braga on behalf of Scott Ferrara, the big guy, and of course, Rob Hammerschmidt, the hammer, and then Kyle Ferguson, who we call the mouth. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching this episode of the Rugby Rant podcast, and we'll see you at the next.
Rugby Coffee was born out of two passions: provided ethically sourced coffee, promoting the growth and development of rugby. By combining these two passions, the folks at Rugby Coffee see an opportunity to bring people together. And together, we can make a difference. Rugby Coffee invests 10% of their profits into giving kids opportunities to play rugby and projects that help uplift communities. These endeavors have been transformational in many kids' lives and uplifted and empowered these communities. The boys of Rugby Coffee have launched 3 distinct brews: Jouet Jouet, Champions Cup, and Crowd Favorite, which is a North American mild blend. Get your pre-orders in now while you can in order to get these wonderfully tasting brews at your doorstep so you're ready to enjoy a great cup of coffee and an awesome conversation. A simple vision can be transformational. Rugby as a sport can inspire communities, bring hope, and provide opportunity. Rugby Coffee, it's not just a game, it's a way of life.
Welcome back, rugby fans. Again, of course, you are watching the Rugby Rant podcast show. My name is Ty Braga, your host for today's activities, alongside, of course, Scott Ferrara, the big guy. And then, of course, joining him, you got Rob, the Hammerschmidt. And from the rugby shop, we have Kyle Ferguson. And this debate here is going to be talking about the Giltinis matchup against Rooney. Now, this was an interesting battle. It was the first cup introduced as the Coast to Coast Battle. The Champagne Cup is its official title, but unofficially known as the Coast to Coast, which I believe we had spoken about in quite a few episodes back, didn't we, gentlemen?
Yes, we did. Absolutely.
So apparently someone is listening out there, and we do take consultation fees from now on. So with that in mind, this was pegged as a battle between West and East. Two conferences separate them. So it really didn't mean a lot for the Giltinis, but it meant a lot for Rooney, who managed to be able to secure a position higher with, of course, an eventual win, which did come as a surprise, I think, to every Major League Rugby fan who, a couple episodes back, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, maybe 2 or 3 weeks back, we were having a conversation about the Giltinis, whether they were unstoppable or not, right? And here we are, where that magic has happened.
the Rugby Rant Super and the Rugby Shop Super Brew. I think out of 71 people, like 4 went with Rooney. One of
I
them
was
being that
not
guy
one of
right
them.
there. So
Before
And
we
that
get
was
into
close
that
to the
one,
score,
I
too.
did pick Seattle last weekend, just saying. So
and by the way, the only reason it did that is because they wouldn't let him back in the city of New York
Yeah.
if he would have voted for LA.
Now, wouldn't it have been
What would
really
have been
funny if the
dead to
one
him?
time?
That's how the saying goes.
Yeah,
What's
wouldn't it have
that?
been really funny if the one time Scott Verroy decided to go turncoat and this would have
So
been
good.
that game, but he didn't, I'm
Oh,
sure.
you mean like Craig Gradelli?
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah.
You're saying that Craig sold
Mike
out.
Perezzini, Craig Gradelli, and Mike Perezzini. I'm calling you guys out.
You've been called out.
So what is it that you always say, Scott? You know people who can put you in a trunk?
Yeah, yeah.
So the New York way, right? So,
Absolutely.
gentlemen, let's take an opportunity to once again frame this conversation. For those of you that are watching at home, round 8 brought an interesting matchup, and there was, of course, plenty of interesting results across the board. But we're going to focus on just the one for this banter here, and that is the final scoreline of 18-16, a low-scoring affair in what some may describe as a defensive battle, which is hardly the words that are thrown around in Major League Rugby these days. However, it did mean that Rooney came out on tops despite what many people had said. And we're here to be able to dig in to see why. And to be able to share his thoughts first, we're going to hand it over to Kyle Ferguson from the Rugby Shop.
Jeez, pressure's on. I thought you were going to give it to the guy who actually picked Rooney to win because there's only one of them here, and maybe in the entire
Why did
country.
you pick Guiltinis, my friend?
Why wouldn't you? I mean, the way they were playing, there was no reason not to. Let's be fair. They looked absolutely fantastic, but Rooney did exactly what they needed to do. They played grind them out style. They took the ball away and they didn't give back, right? And when they did give it back, their pressure was very, very flat, and they picked on the gaps where they knew LA was going to run to. And I think not having Giteau there just obviously killed them in a way because he reads those defensive holes so much faster than almost anybody in the league, I would say right now. So he can find those. And hence when we were talking before about DTH, that guy in support is just dynamite. So when you got Giteau finding those holes and you got these guys running off of them, they're pretty much unstoppable. So you get Giteau back and they play again. We'll see what happens. But in that game there, they played it perfectly. I mean, they're 10. I can never remember his name, but he's a great player. Watching him week in, week out, he's been really fun to watch. And not having Foden in didn't hurt them at all. Again, not good with the names on this team, but the fullback, outstanding stuff. Like really outstanding. Yeah, he had a great game. And to have that guy behind Foden is quite the luxury there in Rooney because those two guys are pretty fantastic.
Right.
So
And that's
obviously
Rooney,
the front row.
Yeah.
Also won the battle. So yeah, that's it. They won the battle, right? They beat him up front. And my buddy Mike Lash had a great game there at wearing the magenta in the middle. And, I think all around it was just a really, really good game to watch. I enjoyed watching that one on the weekend, and it definitely kept entertainment, kept you watching. So it was good.
It had that suspense-filled moments that you love and enjoy about rugby, where you sit on the edge of your seat, kind of in anticipation, what's next, because it felt like for the first time, the Guiltinis were on the back foot and were on the back foot early. Which is not a comfortable position for them to be able to play from. In fact, talking about some of the stats, Rooney had 60% of the possession. This says that they were forced to play from their own half in almost every attack. So as you pointed out, they weren't giving them much to work with. So yeah, I mean, obviously, whether it was a question about tactics being the key difference or some mitigating factors that they perhaps didn't have their key player of Giteau, that decision maker in there to be able to spot those weaknesses. A lot of things that we could unpack there, but let's first swing it over to Scott to be able to hear the counter argument there in favor of Rooney, of course. So Scott, let it flow.
We're still cooking, boys. And the other thing I wanted to point out is the big guy said that Toronto and Atlanta should play for a trophy because they were sharing facilities about 2 months ago. And all of a sudden, the Fire and Ice Cup is born. But let's talk about my Roosters. So here's the thing. You would think Ben Foden not being there, your exit kicks would kind of, they would change the flow of the match. It really didn't. Holland's Head with his exit kicks right on point. The few times that Troy Lockyer did his exit kicks, they were booming. They were where they needed to be. What Rooney did in this match and what they've done in other matches, but obviously the blowouts, it was something lacking, was what I call one and done tackling. The first guy makes contact and drops the ball runner. The second guy comes in and either poaches the ball, or you don't even necessarily have to poach the ball, but just try and set up a counter ruck quick and see what happens, and then maybe fall to an A gap or wherever they're supposed to go, depending on where the field position is. Rooney did that in this match. Will Leonard was a beast. I think he had 11 tackles. He was running into contact on the defensive side and making sure that he was dropping guys one-on-one. Joel Miranda, a young kid, same thing. You didn't see that from him in prior matches, and he was coming up and hitting the contact on the wing. Quinn Nawadi setting up the defensive back line, called it perfectly. He was calling when he saw that LA was going to do their switchbacks. And I think the only time they really broke it was on DTH's run. He ran in support. I forgot who he was running with. He ran in support, got the ball on an offload and took it. And then one or two times Langy, when he came in as a replacement, came in and ran a switchback as an 8-man, which you rarely see. But with his athleticism and build, you can see why he could do it. And, he broke it. But luckily, I think one of them he knocked it on, and the second one he didn't have support, so it got poached. So Rooney did everything on the defensive side. The offensive side I felt was a little lacking. You can't win off of Hans Head's boot all the time. So I think they really have to. They just got a new attack coach. Obviously, he didn't have time to implement anything, but he has to start implementing things quickly because I feel it's the same old attack, and they're getting shut down inside the 5-meter line, and they have to figure out, it's crunch time down there. We need to change something. And really, the other, I just want to say there's two big plays. The first one was a questionable kick from LA that. I was there. I was sitting, midfield, so I don't have the best view. Any kick, if you're sitting at a stadium, you don't really know if it went through. People who were behind it, according to those people, said it went around the post. People on television said it was questionable. But what the flags went up, so the referees called it. But what I think was actually the turning point, with about 4 minutes left, Harry Bennett comes on. And they move some people around, and Harry Bennett has a large boot, and he kicks an exit kick
right for the ball.
Yeah, he kicked an exit kick.
Unbelievable.
DTH didn't have the depth for. I guess he didn't think, because Rooney was at that point almost kicking into the wind, kind of, because the wind had shifted. So I thought DTH thought it was going to be short. It went over his head and bounced and went out of bounds. And
it took a wicked
that Harry Bennett
rolling like it was another grubber kick right behind him.
But those are the types of kicks Harry Bennett is good. He's accurate, and he has the strength on it. And at that point, the Giltinis kind of fell flat, and then the match was the match.
Right. And of course, to be able to bring it into greater context, at that time, that final 10 minutes was marred with yellow cards. Mm-hmm. So you had on both sides, I think, separated by 4 minutes, there were yellow cards. So they were in quick succession, at least. And then you had that momentum shift where, Rooney took a late lead. Well, they took a lead a little bit further on, but I'm saying they took that in that final stretch, which put Giltinis under serious pressure. It was a territory they had not been before. They had never been put to the test in that fashion. And then that kick from Bennett over the head, because DTH was playing shallow. He should have probably been about 10 meters further back than his positioning was to run onto the ball and not run back to the ball. Obviously, Bennett, looking at the gap, took it. And it kind of, in that moment, you felt the game was already won.
I would agree with that. Yep.
Rob, what are some of your thoughts?
First of all, what I notice is, so the game is about to open up, and Matt McCarthy is announcing, and McCarthy says, and Scott, I don't know if you saw this or watched the replay, he goes, and this is a huge win for Rooney. At the beginning of the game, it was almost prophetic. And I went, wait a minute. And he goes, I mean, this is a huge game for Rooney. And so at the end of the game, I went,
McCarthy voted for in the Super Bowl, right?
McCarthy's a friggin' genius. So like Johnny Carson and, Karnak. Here's what I noticed. I thought Rooney played the perfect game, with the exception of the yellow card, as you talked about. It was an entire team effort. It's funny, as you guys talked about Rooney and why they won. I heard a bunch of names. Yes, Hollands had scored all their points, right, with his boot, but the fact that we're talking about Breakley, the fact that we're talking about Bennett, the fact that we're talking about what about Savetta doing some of the hard work, the yeoman's work? What about
Kyle Sumption?
Rockford? What Sumption? What about our guy? Who's your boy? Scott Prop Anthony.
Anthony Parry coming in late in. Yeah.
Coming in Anthony Parry and them Rooney winning a couple of different scrums, just shoving LA back. I mean, it was the perfect game for them. Hollins had only missed one kick. He had some great chip and chases, some great chip kicks to really put LA on the back foot. And they just controlled the pace of play, slowing down LA ball. And I got to be frank, I really like the play of Langy through most of up to this week, but he really lost the handle on a couple balls when that normally he doesn't do. And I think they just got disrupted. They just got their gameplay got disrupted. And I think just one last thing, I really think LA, not only did they miss Gito, they missed Glenn Bryce, who got injured early on in the first half.
And to talk about Langy's issues with the ball, it did when he came on is when it started to rain. So if you've warmed up with a dry ball the entire match and then you haven't played, then you come in and it starts to rain. You have those issues. So I think that was more of just the weather and that's what happens. But also Rooney, the first 15 minutes, Juan Manuel Leguzman went out. He went into a hard hit on the defense to make a tackle. And I don't know if he sprained his knee, but it was a knee injury. And that brings Kyle Sumption on. And Kyle Sumption ran like a man friggin' possessed. On the restart kicks, no friggin'
right
fear.
Down the sideline, I think he broke about 2 or 3 tackles before finally hitting the ground.
It's if you guys haven't seen Kyle Sumption play, I've been a fan of Kyle Sumption for years. I consider him a friend.
And he's a New York boy, right? Tri-state area boy.
No. He's actually out from out west, believe it or not. Okay. But he lives. He's been living here for a while.
Right.
He coaches at West Point, but him and then I wanted again Quinn Nawadi, I think on defense was another unsung hero, another guy who was making one and done tackles, and he calls it. He's the cop. He's calling what the defensive line's going to do. So they played it perfect. But yeah, Kyle Sumption, man, the rugby Viking dude doesn't go down.
So let's take an opportunity to be able to look at some of those mitigating factors that people are inevitably going to throw out there, right? So we had already spoken about some key players not present in the Giltini squad. So it was for lack of a better term, it wasn't their best team on the field, right? And we know that for a variety of different reasons. And now as we get deeper into the season, all teams have this to a certain degree, right? But there's a lot of people that have been saying it's so difficult for guys that have played on the international stage and have played leagues overseas to now suddenly be thrown from playing at one of the greatest stadiums available to them at the Coliseum, which is almost, for lack of a better term, pitch perfect, right, as they say, to now be thrown to Cochrane Stadium, which has a multitude of different markings for different sports. You're losing a little bit of width, which in some cases, I don't know who it was, but put a foot out and it was a running opportunity for try, but there was a foot out and it was called back. If you had that extra meter, you would have been on the inside. But then again, would you also have had a defender there because they would have been playing wider? So you could always pick at these points, but there'd always be another counter argument to it, right?
But at that point, if you're going to talk about width, they go by the soccer rules. The soccer pitches are 68 meters and rugby pitches can be 68 to 70 meters. So my point is, the best defender is the touch line. So friggin' run inside.
Right. And
run away
there's merit to that. And, so I pretty much know what Scott's going to say about it, but I was going to ask, do you think these mitigating factors are of great importance that could have affected this game or not? I mean, let's ask Kyle first.
Okay. No, Scott, go ahead.
We know what Scott's going to say.
Because what I'm going to say is being at the 3 home matches, who I saw the most mistakes on the field were by Rooney kicking the ball and their exit kicks thinking they're behind the 22 and they're not. People don't realize though, the way they've done it is they put the flags at the 22. So the guys know. So, and I think in my opinion, more players go by the flag in their peripheral vision than the line actually down. How many guys are looking down when they're kicking at the line to see where they're at versus taking a quick glance to see where the flag is at, So the only time I've seen people have issues were Rooney kickers in the first 2 matches kicking it and not realizing they were in front of it. So, if Rooney is the only people having issues with it, there's no mitigation. You know what I mean?
Life's
Well, Kyle, with your refereeing experience, if you had to be able to officiate a game on something that resembled a cross to hashing like that, would that be difficult for you? And do you think that is a mitigating factor for Giltinis?
It is tough, that's for sure, especially when you're not there all the time. To Scott's point, like Rooney makes mistakes there too, though, and everybody will at that point. As a referee,
I mean, again, so not to disrupt you, but it is important to note, and I don't think we actually said it, Cochrane Stadium is not a Rooney Stadium.
Yeah.
It's a field they're using.
So they're also playing out of their element. I mean, they should be looking at the flags, and come on, right? Like that's just errors at the end of the day. Same with the touchline. To me, that's errors. But to go sort of back to what you were asking, the mitigating factors and people not being available, I feel like that has more to do with guys playing on turf that aren't used to it. I feel like the turf is playing havoc on some guys' bodies that just are not used to it. And again, like knowing some referees and things like that, like even them, they're like, we don't have this. Like they are not used to the turf. The turf is a lot different. Being refereed at turf, I refed out here at UBC, and they have like top of the line turf, which is great.
On Segra Field, we saw a really nasty concussion because of a tackle on the turf there.
So it's different, right? It's different on your body. It's different the way you tackle. You see the guys all taped up on their arms so they don't get the rug rash all over themselves, right? So it's just, I feel like that's playing more of a part, and why these guys also are having to take time off. They're not used to the wear and tear on the body from that aspect.
And the ball bounces differently on the turf too. You notice that in the first.
Rooney knows that story.
Yeah. But it was, I mean, there's a lot of sloppy play early on with the first 10 minutes. And I think a part it was due to the wind, but the other part of it was due to the funny bounce of the ball. And, also to kick for touch, when you're actually trying to put it in play and then bouncing out of bounds, it's really hard to tell, how much.
Where do you want it to land?
Where do you want it to land, and how much how much oomph do you put on it to get it to go inside that 5 meter line or that 5 meter channel on the side?
Get a new kicker.
Luke Carty, that was one of the things that LA excelled at, was Luke Carty putting it inside the 5 meters. They just couldn't convert.
Yeah.
I think that a factor you didn't see on television, but I talked in my pre-match show for the Rooney fans, was the wind was going from coming at the camera angle. So if you noticed, everybody who went for touch was coming at the camera because the wind was coming directly across the field that way. So trying to kick into it, you knew it was never going to come into touch. So I think that was a mitigating factor to say you can really only start your set pieces on one side of the field and then throw it out to the other side on your attack. So it was kind of precipitous that you knew as a defender, they're going to have to kick for touch this way, and then we know what they're going to do when they bring the ball that way.
You would think DTH would have seen that when it went over his head.
Well, that exit kick was a little different because it was in play, it wasn't.
It was particularly good.
Yeah. No, it was a great kick. I'm just saying, you think he would have noticed that by that point in the game.
But also DTH, I think, has played every match, and has he been taken out yet?
He missed one game.
And he goes deep into matches. I mean, we're talking, he was now at the 76th minute, of a guy who runs the way he runs.
He's playing at least 2/3 of the game for sure.
Yeah, and so it's just it's one mental lapse that killed him, but it was enough. So
and that's the only one I've seen from him all year.
Yeah, he was great on defense. He's another guy great on defense, dropping guys on tackles.
And he pinches ball. Like being a Canadian fan, like watching that guy play for the last however many years, like he's a beast. Like, man,
and
he plays like another back rower.
On top level, which is great, But these type of things where players aren't used to that and doing it at this level again and again, you do want to be able to rest some of your key players. That's normal, right? And if you are going to do that, maybe if you are the Giltinis management and coaching staff, you go, if I was going to be able to rest a player, this would be the game. Because what did it mean to them? It was a cross-conference matchup, so they weren't at any risk of losing position in their particular table, right? Because even if they lost the game, they're not dropping. They got so many points in hand. And then overall, even across the entire league, they're still on top. So they had a game, for lack of a better term, a freebie. And they may have chosen to use it in this occasion. So, I mean, that's a pretty tactical, strategic manner to look at it. But really, I mean, if this was, yes, it was the Coast to Coast Cup, but was it really the best competition available with who they could have had
Well, it's
played?
also indicative of their conference. I
Yeah,
think the Eastern Conference, when they go to play the Western Conference in crossover, are going to try and have to not. They might not be able to play some of the guys they want to play and kind of take some guys off the stove per se because it's so tight. Whereas LA has such a lead, they figure they can drop one.
yeah,
I also think that it's indicative of tactics. If you look at Rooney, Ben Foden played against Toronto because Tuchelet's there, and it's two great attacking, kicking fullbacks that you want to play against each other. This week, the Glenn Bryce, is okay, but you can put Troy Lockyer back there and still have that advantage. So it's tactful and picking those pieces.
right, absolutely. So let's go once around the table to be able to summarize this debate over here, and let's hear from each of you again. What is your final thoughts on this game? Do you think that ultimately Rooney played a great game and just outplayed them, or do you think that Giltinis were short on ammunition and they played a much lower standard than they've become accustomed to? Kyle, you can open it up.
All right. Well, as I alluded to, LA was missing people, but to me, that's still no excuse. It doesn't matter who's out there. This is a professional league. You're playing the team you're playing. So Rooney did what they needed to do to win the game against the team that was out there. It's still
Right.
a win over an undefeated team, right? Like it's all of those things, and I think you have to give them kudos for that. The only thing I would say, I don't know, Scott, if you watched it back on TV, but man, those Rooney guys, they talk a lot to the referee and whatnot throughout the game, but like you could hear it. No, but like you'd sort of look at me, but like you
Lockyer
could hear
got
it a
stolen,
lot,
didn't he?
right?
Well, if
Yeah,
if
but
we're
no,
already
it happened the
talking,
week
if we're already
before too,
questioning
right?
where,
Like,
if we're really questioning whether a kick went through the sticks, maybe they should be talking.
well, but that's
No.
not the referee's fault.
No,
But
I
anyways,
mean,
I'm
look,
just saying,
yeah,
as in general, without that kick though, like it happened throughout the game, and like I'm not saying it's just Rooney. I think it's a lot of the guys, and I think that just is bringing that down a bit. Our game, like the rugby game, that's not to me how it's meant to be played and how guys are supposed to act on the field. So, like you heard JP Doyle the other week, kind of he was getting back at him, right? And people are like, "Oh, this is great." Again, to me, that's not great. I just wanted to sort of talk about that a little bit in that there's just a lot of chatter out there that I feel isn't necessary. And I think from LA, you didn't hear it. They just went about their business. So that's my opinion from watching it on TV. Wasn't there, but there was no talking to LA about talking after the whistle. There was a lot of talking to Renee about having something to say about everything. So just a comment. That's all right. They won the game though. They outplayed them.
yeah. I mean, a win is a win, and the points are on the board, right? And it's put
Yeah.
Rooney in a better position in their own conference that has secured them, a good stead moving into the next matchup because they are the Giant Slayer right now as it stands, and that's on record, and that's what counts, right? Rob, your final thoughts.
I think Rooney played the perfect game. They played very well. They played the game they needed to play. They controlled every phase of the play they needed to control, and their big dogs stepped up and played very well this time, and they made McCarthy look like a genius.
Totally.
So because it was a huge win.
That's true. Yeah.
So, and that's it, guys. We're not going to let Scott talk because we know what he's going to say. No,
like, what
Scott,
else can we
final
say?
thoughts, my friend. Final thoughts.
Well, this will get Kyle going. So I played hockey my whole life. My father played hockey his whole life, and he always had the mantra: it doesn't have to look pretty; it just has to go in when you score a goal. That's the same thing with rugby. It doesn't have to look pretty as long as you put more points on the board. You got those 4 points. But what I do think Rooney, and this goes back to 2019, Rooney lacks in the bonus points, and that's why it's put them in their position that they're in second place now to annul a team that has one less win than they do.
Yeah.
So,
so I mean,
don't worry, we'll beat you in the semis.
Yeah. Well, no matter what, the Eastern Conference is still the most exciting because it's almost anything can happen still. The point separation is still, quite volatile. It can swing with 1 or 2 changes in the game. The Giltini side in the Western Conference, you feel like it's a little more predictable, and certainly it felt like that before this matchup. And I think one of the greatest takeaways is that the Giltinis are not unstoppable, right? they obviously do have flaws like every other team. And as the season progresses, they'll use perhaps what Rooney has now brought forth as a model because it has revealed some of their weaknesses. And if that means that you have to be able to hope that the weather's shitty every time, I'm sure that they will do a rain dance if they need to. But, more importantly, you take the opportunities that are given to you. You use a tactic and you stick to it. And the one credit that I will certainly says that rings true with everything we say is that Rooney played a better game because they played to their strengths. And because they did so successfully, Giltinis were not able to play to their strengths. So once again, we need to be able to crown a winner for this episode. And as it stands, we have debated the point on whether, well, how do we best define Major League Rugby's style of play in comparison to other leagues, which of course was in the first part of this this debate. Then we went on to be able to talk about the Giltinis and Rooney matchup in round 8. Overall, I felt that even there were some yellow cards dealt out. The winner will be crowned as Mr. Scott Ferrara.
Yes.
Rigged.
So the Coast to Coast Cup goes to Rooney one more time.
Champagne Cup, baby.
The guy can go 2 minutes over and still come away with the win.
Well,
you get a bonus point, Rob. You're Mr. Bonus Point.
Built off my comment, by the way.
It's a Rooney thing.
Yeah.
Wait, Rob was the one. Rob was the one chatting the ref saying, "I need a yellow card." What's that bullshit?
Yeah. But hold on. You should have realized something was probably up there, Rob, because 3 of us are wearing Rooney gear, and you're the odd one out. It was just subtle suggestions around the screen. But right. I wanted to be able to take
all that matters.
Yeah. So let's take a moment to be able to once again thank our guest ranter here, Carl Ferguson from the Rugby Shop. We'd like to be able to, before we head out on each episode, give the floor to our guests to be able to send a shout out to anybody important, a special message you want to be able to send out there. Your opportunity is here.
Thanks.
Man, I would like to say a few words, but we know that's not true.
That's not true.
But
no, good. Again, nobody, just like the last time, I don't think anybody that I would like to say I love very much would even listen to me. So on this rant. So love you, Danielle. Haley,
Parker. Their spare time to be able to listen to you.
No, they listen to the mouth enough at home, so they don't need to listen to it here for an hour.
Well, we want to be able to take the opportunity to thank you, and of course, thank you as our viewer of the Rugby Rant for continuing to be able to support us. And now, and continuing forward, you can find us on social media under the handle @RugbyRantPod. We release new episodes every Monday and every Thursday. So again, make sure that you follow us on the handle @RugbyRantPod, where you can continue to get updates by liking, subscribing, and of course, if you go ahead and rate our content as well, it does help us. When you can find us online through your favorite streaming provider under the handle @RugbyRantPod. And of course, this has been an opportunity to be able to share episode 50 with you. So a bit of a milestone for us in the gang here. Very happy, and I'm sure there will be plenty more to be able to come. But until then, I want to be able to say thanks from myself, Ty Braga, on behalf, of course, of Scott Ferrara, Rob Hammerschmidt, and Carl Ferguson. You have been watching another episode of the Rugby Rant podcast show, and we will see you at the next.